Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to get into the topic of the current state of dating and navigating the dating world. I was having a conversation with somebody recently, well, a few people, in regards to just kind of the climate of the way things are at this point in time, and really just kind of reflected on the fact that things are just definitely different than what they have been, say, in previous days. And though I've spoken a little bit on the channel about this before, definitely can say that after speaking about it a little bit more, kind of have a bit more of a breakdown in terms of some of the elements of it and then ways that you can kind of avoid this. And this goes both for women and men, because it's not just one group that's receiving it, though I personally think that it's a little lopsided in the way that it is, but there's a reason for that in terms of who's getting the worst of it and why and whatnot. There's a certain breakdown and dynamic of that. So first I'm going to jump into the aspect that is the problem in the dating world, in the current dating state, when it comes to women, and then also some of the elements that come to men. For women right now, currently, a lot of them have the state of mind. The ones who are perpetuating the problem go from one thing to the next without really kind of any thought or any kind of process on it in terms of it being a thing that's, something that has weight to it, where you'd say, okay, like I really care about this person that I'm getting to know, this and that, even if it's just day one, but just that aspect of like a person where you're like, and this, let me just pause to say that this is really a reflection of what's taking place in larger cities. I can't really speak too much on other places, but I will say with the advent of social media, it has caused something that was usually confined to a big city mentality to now be a little bit more widespread, because essentially what that issue is getting instant gratification from people all around you. Now you're able to kind of get that, or instant attention from the internet, so you don't have to necessarily go anywhere to get it. But going back to what my point was, don't mind, my oven is on right now, so that's my oven. Women going from one thing to the next without any kind of weight or consideration in regards to, just that process. Like they might start getting to know someone day one of speaking to somebody, or whatever the case is, whether they met them on a dating app, whether they met them just in the street, or whatever the case is. And in that very moment, they can just go, you know what, like, I'm not feeling this. I'm just chucking them without the basis of, you know what, well, this is a person. Maybe there's something more to explore. Maybe, I don't see all the things that are perfect right now. Nothing's going to be perfect, but it's worth me putting the time into, and even reflecting on the fact that they themselves are not perfect. And the guy could be saying to himself, she's not perfect either, but he's not just going to just randomly leave. So there's that element of it. And the fact going hand in hand with that is there's no consistency or motive or motivation to put in the work. So rather than just say, like, I'm going to actually take that time and really get to know someone, okay, like on face value, they're not perfect. I'm just going to, I'm going to put in the work. Instead, it becomes, you know what? No, I'm just done. I'll move on to the next. If the next person isn't perfect, I'll move on to the next. But I want them to fill out this checklist, and they got to meet that 100%, or otherwise I'm not putting in no effort, no work into the situation, which really kind of comes from that basis of, having too much stimulation, especially, like I said, from the internet now, making it worse, social media, as opposed to where before you kind of had that in big cities, because a woman could walk down the street and get a lot of attention. In smaller towns, you didn't have it as much because maybe that didn't happen as much. Whereas now you just go on social media, you get that attention, and a lot of it is false attention. It's not true validation, but what happens is it causes them to feel like I have so many options that I can just discard whatever comes my way that I don't feel, is at the level that I'm gonna entertain, I feel like entertaining. So that's kind of part of the cause of it, but obviously it in itself is the problem that's done without putting in work. And then lastly on this, you have a lot of women who don't appreciate the average man, and they view him as something to step on. So sometimes it's just, okay, I might use that person to go out on a date. I've spoken to someone just the other day. A friend of mine said to me about, we are talking about this topic and about how they could spend money, go on a date, and the woman expects that the man is supposed to pay like traditional, but yet he goes on that date, nothing comes of it. He just spent some money, and then that person just doesn't call back anymore. And it kind of leaves the average guy into a place where even just on that level, I mean, it gets worse if they use the person even furthermore, but they just even on that basis, when you think about the fact that a guy might have to call a woman, a different women, like say if they go out on a date Friday and a Saturday night. So it's just even 2 days out of the week, we'll say. But then that's a total of 8 times in a month. And say during those times, they spend somewhere between $50 and $100 per date because they're paying for themselves and the other person to go out to eat, we'll say. At that point, you're looking at, we'll say, even if we'll cut it in the middle. So we'll say 75. So that's 150 a week. That's looking at $600 for the month. $600 for the month that they could have been saving, putting away. And if you check back on some earlier episodes on this channel, you'll see that when I went into things like budgeting, how much $500 or so a month can go for you saving every month and putting it in investments or putting it towards you trying to, save to buy a property or whatever the case is. That goes a long way. So the problem with that is literally men will be destroying their lives in the process of trying to date, and the women will have no consideration of that, knowing that they're just tossing them to the side and it doesn't even matter. But even worse, stepping on the average man as if they're better than average when they're not. But they get this validation from social media or from the wrong type of guy who make them feel by he's settling for her to use her, makes her feel like she's worth that amount. And with that being said, we're going to jump into the aspect of men that cause a problem into the dating game. So with men, you have about 20% of men, give or take. This is just a ballpark number, but most guys and most people who kind of like get into this stuff and study it, even just on a basic level of just, you being aware of your surroundings, will generally go and say it's probably about 20% of men, because it's not a whole lot of them. But about 20% of men who are constantly playing games and really don't care that much. And essentially, those guys, every guy, first off, we'll just say this. I mean, I don't want to go into too much detail with this because it's going to divert into some, a long conversation of it, but most men often settle. It's just part of what they do. Why? Because in the process of needing to get physical stimulation, they sometimes have to settle for someone that they're not maybe particularly interested in to have that. So what happens is those guys who play games, those 20% of the top guys they're not necessarily better quality guys. When I say top 20%, they're just the 20% of guys that are getting all the women because maybe they're super charismatic, they're super attractive, they're super funny, they're all these things that are designed for hunting and for mass mating. That's something that I've coined before that I don't know if people speak on it in that terms, but it's almost like a personality or psychological evolution of man in a short amount of time to become so adept at being what every girl needs them to be, all types of girls, that they become designed for like mass mating. They can't even turn that off. It's just one of those things that they can't turn off. So it's almost becomes a thing where women just have to be aware of this, which is why I'm making this video, as opposed to just saying, why are men being that way? It's not so much why are they being that way. You got to realize that's the wolf. He's the hunter. So I digress. So you have those guys, those 20% of guys who they're constantly playing games. They're going to get with girls who they don't necessarily want to be with because it's easy for them to get with them because that girl's looking for that guy to be her dream. And rather than consider, why does that guy like me? Why is it he's even into me? Because he can have anyone else in this room. Instead, they just go, okay, well, that fantasy complex, well, he chose me and I'm sure he chose me because I have all these reasons that make me great. What ends up happening based on that is that guy ends up playing games. She now views, these men and all men as bad guys. But what happens is the next guy she gets with is also one of those 20% guys. And so it repeats the same process. With that being said, one thing with those type of men they know they'll always be chosen. So they'll never stop playing those games because women will keep making the same actions by targeting those same qualities the men have, which is the reason why those men adapted those qualities. Sometimes even having those qualities as a superior trait over traits like, you know, building resources and all these other kind of things. I mean, you'll have some guys who have a little bit of all of that when they're playing on a higher playing field, meaning that, okay, you're trying to go after even higher caliber of women, maybe who are established, have jobs, and they look attractive, and they have the whole rounded thing, personality. Those guys might still have those traits of hunter traits while still having money. But the average guy of that 20% who's, not necessarily rich or wealthy, he may not be focused on building in terms of his career or anything like that. But it doesn't matter because he's like, I'll always get the women and they're going to keep coming back. So I don't have to put a lot of work into a relationship. They're going to keep coming back to me regardless. So they view it like there's no need to change, and they won't. And women will keep choosing those same type of guys because they've studied the fact of what women want on a practice type of level, for lack of a better word, experience level, meaning they studied it based on trial and error from being young. And so what happens is those same type of guys will keep playing the games, and the women aren't going to realize that inherently, if you go after someone with these traits, they're going to always play you because they know you want them so bad. And so essentially doing the same thing that most of the women do on their end, but to the average guy, these 20% men are doing it to every woman on a mass scale level. So breaking down both aspects of what men and women are doing in that kind of general talk that we just did right there, pretty much you have to find ways of avoiding this. Now, but the first thing you have to establish is are you a part of that? Because it will never stop for you if you are a part of that. And I say that because there's a lot of people who I've spoken to, people who that I know, friends, family, associates, who they speak to people, and the people that they're very well speaking to is actually part of the problem, or people that I've spoken to before in the past who are part of the problem, even just on like you talking with someone just on a social level. And as you're talking with them, you realize, hey, like you're doing the same problems as that you claim is happening to you. And then they may laugh it off. It's about establishing, are you part of the problem? A lot of times people want to play the victim role and they want someone to sympathize with them, but yet they're doing that same thing to somebody else. So first you have to understand and establish, are you part of that same problem? Next, in terms of how to avoid it, I mean, it's very hard to answer that question, but at least knowing it and knowing how things work at least creates some sort of defense, at least that you understand and you know it. And obviously we can't go into all the aspects of it, but we went into a few things of the people who are doing it, the types of people, type of men, type of women who are doing it, and how that goes and what causes that. But in terms of avoiding it, one of the main things you have to do first is gain strength of character for yourself to know that you are not going to chase anybody that's not chasing you. That's first and foremost. I'm going to start with the women. When it comes to the women who are falling prey to the men, when it comes to that, the biggest thing I could tell you is this, and I know this is very hard to not do. If a guy is probably around 25 and below, you could even stretch this just for security reasons from 30 and below. If they're 30 and below and they're extremely charismatic, they're extremely handsome, they're extremely funny, and I say there's a difference between being like silly funny and like on point funny, like you're just really funny. Silly funny, you might say something silly, stupid, and some people might laugh, sometimes they don't. You're not always on point. When you're always on point with your jokes, that type of funny, that's like a skilled kind of funny. Anyone who's like that, like I said, charismatic, super attractive, super confident, all these traits that women generally think they want in a man who is 30 and below, for the most part, you could make that 25 and below, but like I said, sometimes it creeps up to 30. Anyone who's of that certain younger age and they have those traits, you want to avoid them. Why? Because they shouldn't have those traits at that time. Why should they not have those traits at the time? Because they didn't earn them from real world hardship experience. They always had them because when they were young, probably like a teenager, they were always liked. And when they were liked, guess what that meant? That meant that they had the freedom now to completely explore that power and evolve at a very fast rate, to where they didn't now no longer had to work hard at attracting women by means of learning how to talk to them properly, this and that, all those kind of things, being chivalrous, all that kind of stuff. They learned very quickly, okay, like how to be what works for them, and to put on that mask that just works and it gets the job done for them. And I'm not knocking them, but I'm just saying, for the woman side of it, to protect yourself, you want to stay away from any guy who is like that. Now, if a guy is chivalrous, if a guy has charisma, if he's pretty funny, if he has, and not all these traits at one time, but if he has some of these traits, he's confident in this and that, after, say, the age of 30, it probably could be simply because he earned it by putting in that work, by trial and error, by being rejected, by learning the hard way, by whatnot. And that's different, because those two examples are the equivalent of someone who's like born rich versus someone who was born poor and had to become rich. There's a difference in between how you appreciate how you got there, and then you're not trying to hurt or use anybody. You're just using your skills to better get what you want, but without necessarily doing things in a way where you don't appreciate the people maybe below you, or, you know, who are not at your level. You're not looking to step on someone or use somebody. You're not just going to say like, oh, I'm going to just get what I can from whoever, because you appreciate the hard road to have gotten there, if that makes sense. I like using that analogy because I think it puts it in a way that most people are able to understand it. So that's far as for the women. As far as the men and you avoiding all that kind of stuff, first off, you got to have a lot of strength of character. It's going to be very hard on you. You got to have a lot of strength of character. You got to learn to say, don't be afraid to say this, because we're not in older times anymore. So don't be afraid to say this. You need to be able to say to yourself, you know what? I'm going to go on a date with a woman. I'm telling her, you're paying for half. If we're just friends, there's nothing here, because there's nothing there. If you go on a date with someone, that doesn't mean that you're anything other than just they're a stranger they're going on a date with. We're not in those old times anymore. You need to learn to protect yourself. You tell them, listen, we're going Dutch, which means we're splitting the bill. Or, you know what, like, if maybe I'll pay this time, you could pay next time. But if you're worried that you won't get a second date to go out with them, then you know what, you say this. Let's go to like a coffee place or whatever the case is. Go someplace mellow where we can talk and actually get to know each other. It's not about you getting to enjoy the expense that I'm paying for you, but you're actually getting to know me. And then, sorry about that. And then if you end up paying for the whole thing and it's something like coffee, at least you know, okay, maybe I spent between my cup of coffee, their cup of coffee, I spent $10. Cool. That's not a big deal. And if all your dates start like that, then doing that same multiplication like we said before, instead of paying $600 for the month, if you pay $10 each time, well then guess what? You're looking at what? $20 a week, $80 is a big difference for the month. $80 for the month versus $600 for the month. So at least your loss is not as bad. So be strong-willed with that. Don't go, and if someone says, oh, I don't want to do that, I don't drink coffee, but I don't drink coffee either, but we're just going to talk. If you have a problem just sitting and talking with me, that means we probably don't vibe anyway. That's one thing in terms of the spending money aspect. The other part is attention. If somebody is not calling you back, and you find that you're always the one hitting them back on the first day or second day, and they're not really getting back to you, take one day. After maybe you've been speaking to them for somewhere between 3 days to a week, and you're always the one hitting them up, take one day. One day after that where you do not hit them up at all. If they don't hit you back, you stop talking to them immediately. Do not give in. Do not go, oh, yeah, but I really want to. No, this person doesn't like you at all. And all they're looking to do is use you. Because if they really are interested in you, they are going to try to get to know you back. So make sure of that, because that's a very big deal. And let's see, is there anything else? And the last point I'm going to just make is, make sure that you know what you want. And sometimes this comes from trial and error, from dating different people and learning the hard way what you will and won't tolerate. But make a map out of all the things that you want and don't want. A lot of times we see red flags these days, and this could apply to the women as well in terms of taking this bit of advice, but I'm really saying this to the men because I know a lot of men, especially at a young age, tend to overlook a lot, especially if they don't have as many options as the woman does. You might see some red flags. You might think that that person may change down the line, or maybe they'll grow out of it, they'll mature. We're living in a different era now where people don't do that. Back in the days, you may have had where if somebody was like dating and they're in their young 20s and maybe they hit like, they may be 20 years old, teenage age. And then right when they hit like 23, maybe like 40 years ago, grown-ups grew up quick and they started working at 18, 20, 21. So they usually broke out of that juvenile phase early, like 21, 22 years old. Like, okay, I can't be whatever. I'm trying to build a family. Today, 30 is the new 20, unfortunately, which is sad. And people play games for a lot longer of a period of time. So I say this to say that if you think that when you see red flags, they're going to just mature out of it, they won't. Don't count on that anymore, because most people do not mature out of it now because they feel they don't need to. The times have changed. The eras have changed. People don't grow out of their red flags anymore. They embrace them. They hold on to them like a badge of honor and say, I'm not going to change. You got to accept me for the way I am. Otherwise, you're trying to change me, even though it's a list of red flags. So with that being said, you got to have a list of things for yourself that you're like, I will not tolerate. And by no means do not break on that. No exceptions. You make sure that you stay strong on that. And in addition to that, when you see red flags, just know they're never going to change. You run right away. Do not give a pass for any red flag, especially ones that are a big deal to you. Now, it's small if someone says like, okay, whatever, this person, I don't know. You could pick your thing, but maybe you're like, this person doesn't like going to the movies. I like going to the movies. I'm not talking about things like that, but things that really make you feel bad. You already got to know. You got to cut that person. So be strong in what you want, know what you want, and stay firm with that. That's really the last bit of thing I would tell you for the men. And like I said, that could apply to the women as well. And I hope that this video was very helpful for you guys. I know it just brushes the surface. I know that this whole thing can go deeper, but like I said, I've had some conversations. I'm sure a lot of people that experience this, where the dating world is just very messed up right now. It's chaotic. I've spoken to some people who don't think anything's wrong with it at all, but some of those people who feel that way are doing very good in the dating world because they are either one of those 20% of men, or they're one of those women who, they're having their fun, their way with things. But if you're someone who's at the bottom of that barrel and you're not getting the fair end of the share, you're not going to agree with that. And for that, you have to stand your ground with these things I mentioned, so that way you're not the victim of someone else. Post anything inside the comments if you want, questions, anything like that, any of your thoughts, maybe things that we could recap on or go over, or just what your feelings are, your experiences in any of this stuff. And all you guys, stay safe, be safe out there, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.